welcome to the Sugar and Spikes podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and anyone ready to uplevel their career in their own damn way. I'm Des. I'm a life coach for women who get that having it all sometimes means having to balance the good and the bad, the sugar and the spikes, and all the in-between.
And I'm Tammy. I'm a therapist, and I'm all about helping as many people as possible to build awareness and make meaningful changes in their lives. I'm also dedicated to diversity and inclusion and increasing access to mental health care.
Between the two of us, we have 4 master's degrees and thousands of hours helping people develop balance, confidence, and clarity on their terms. So let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. I'm your ever faithful co-host, Des, and with me today is...
Tammy, as usual.
It's a shocker, I know. You're all surprised.
Surprise!
I'll give you a minute to catch your breath, to figure your shit out. We good? Okay.
What do you want to talk about this week?
I feel like that wasn't a great lead-in, and there could have been a better lead-in for our topic.
I'm so sorry.
So
You go.
I didn't have anything else to say. I'm like, that could have been used for another topic, but I don't know what topic, and it doesn't fit this topic. Would that maybe be a little bit of a...
Should we start again?
a regret?
Maybe. I could have done it differently.
It could have been different. It could have been better.
Could have been way better.
I could have caught your guys' attention so much faster.
Oh my goodness.
I could have been more on point.
I could have let you do the lead in like I usually do instead of just jumping right to it.
What could have been? Like, we'll never know.
We'll never know.
And I think at this point, the only reasonable answer is to just end the podcast.
And just regret it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay, today, if you didn't catch on, we're talking about regrets.
Regrets.
And, okay, so yeah, it was a little, like, over the top. But I feel like that's actually kind of common for people to go from, like, point A to point Z and throwing the baby out with the bathwater because, like, something shifted and, well, that didn't happen, now fuck it all, kind of.
Yeah, to kind of ruminate on what could have happened, what should have happened, what ought to happen, what might happen, and to kind of regret the choices that they've made. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, so this idea of regret is interesting because personally, and this, God help me, this is going to sound really conceited, I don't consider myself to identify as someone with regrets.
Same.
Like, when we were talking about this beforehand, I was like, I can't think of many. Maybe the UPenn thing. If you guys don't know, I almost went to UPenn for grad school. Like, I was accepted. They were competing with tuition, with like UMich and stuff. So I had options for grad school, and like I booked a mover to go to Philly. Like I was very, very close to going, and then things changed and I didn't. I stayed in Portland, and my life turned out exactly as it should be, like I believe. But I will say, I feel like I spent maybe a year or two, like, on the verge of letting it fuck up my life, the fact that it didn't happen.
So how do you think you dealt with that helped you kind of move forward?
That's a good question. I feel like the universe kind of pulled me along, honestly. Honestly, I think at one point you were like, you didn't go, so stop. Like,
that sounds like me. Like, just get over it. Yep. I'm a great therapist.
Totally.
My work here is done.
I don't, like, I feel like there were just a handful of moments where I realized what was going on. Like, I had enough insight and stuff to be like, what's done? You know, I started to reapply because of the shitty first year.
That's right, you did.
I started to reapply.
I forgot about that.
And that whole situation, and like they were like more than welcoming. Like they were like ready to do this. And then it was this continuation of other things, you know, and
life had moved forward from that point.
And it felt almost like backtracking. Like, even though, like, UPenn's a great school and all of that stuff, like, fabulous, but I felt like I was in grad school reliving my senior year of college. Mm-hmm. And that piece felt weird.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It's almost like your life had gone on and you weren't now in the same place. Yeah. So trying to kind of recapture that at that time just didn't feel right to you.
Well, and with everything that was going on that year, there was a lot of like deep introspection. And it was like, well, I had applied, like when I was first applying for grad schools, like I had this very definitive role that I wanted. Like I wanted to be a therapist. And right. Depending on the degree, like what would that look like and stuff like that. And then after first year of grad school, it was, well, I don't even know if therapy is what I want to do.
You knew it wasn't what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Maybe. It wasn't even a maybe.
And so I was like, yeah, I don't know, just like uprooting my life and uprooting my goals felt like too much uprooting. So I managed the other shift instead of like moving across the country.
Yeah.
Because I think about like the cross country move that I just did last year, and that was when most of my life was settled, so I had space to throw a lot of things up in the air.
Yeah.
But I feel like if I had done both of those, and then like there are just those moments where like something happens and there's a shift. So I don't even know if I could fully pinpoint it, but I would say that would be a hodgepodge of like how I kind of moved on.
Okay.
Maybe I realized life was moving on and like I had to get on board. Maybe.
Well, and also you realized that where you were maybe wasn't what you expected and it wasn't something you didn't want. Yeah. Right? It wasn't like you were in a position where you were like, I don't like what's going on. I don't like what is happening. You're like, oh, I kind of dig this. Like, I like this opportunity. So I'm going to stay here. And I know that a lot of times we talked about, well, how would your life would be different from the way it looks now? Are there things about how it looks now that you don't like? And very often you said no. I mean, the transition from program to program in grad school was a rough transition, but at no time were you like, did I feel like you couldn't cope with it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So, what about you? Well, any like specific pieces?
I mean, I also don't think of myself as a regretful person. I feel like, I mean, there were things that when I think back on them, that I'm like, yeah, I wish that could have gone differently. And I know I made the right decision. Yeah. So for me, maybe not the right decision for others, but the right decision for me, for my family, and, you know, for everyone concerned. Yeah. And so, well, almost everyone concerned, but like, it doesn't occupy my time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't spend time thinking about it. And that's not to say that other people don't. There's people very close to me in my life who they do have pretty serious regrets and it is very distressing to them. So yeah. Like, it's just that I think for me, when I make difficult decisions, I find a way to come to peace with the decision that I made. And so, like, I chose to do that. So I felt like to that degree that I was in control and I made my choice. And, you know, I wouldn't have made that choice if I couldn't have lived with the outcome. So I hope I do the work up front.
Yeah.
But I think you can do work around regret later on. But when you do the work up front, you don't have quite so much distress that kind of carries on from, on down the road for you quite so much.
I think a lot of the way, and I'm just thinking about this right now, a lot of the way I interact with like prior memories and stuff, because I just thought of like something else that would have been like a regretful moment. And as soon as I thought of it, the next thing that came up was, well, you did the best you could with the knowledge you had.
Right.
Like, it really, the way you can perceive regret and everything, like, or at least the way I kind of interact with it, is very much stemmed from like the work that I did do in grad school around everyone's trying their best. You know, like even Atticus
sneezing away.
But it's the like, we're all doing the best we can with the tools that we have. So expecting a more educated, a higher outcome, a better result,
or
like,
just
or
a
looking
different
at a
result.
different result, like, it's unfair to put on the person that made the choice. Like, even like looking back at like, we'll use the UPenn example, even looking back at like me 6 years ago, it's unfair to put that on her because I made the best choice I had with the information that I had.
Yeah.
You know, and I think with your example too, it's the best decision with the tools, knowledge, and skills that you have at the time.
And I think there's a lot of inherent coping that goes into those statements, right? Like you talk about, like, it's not fair. Like, even if I had the information I have now, it's not fair to put that on me 5 years ago, because me 5 years ago made the absolute best decision I could. And so trying to put some sort of other spin on it, or not spin, that's not really what I mean, but trying to somehow change that in your mind to say, like, well, you could have done this. So you're like, well, yeah, and I'm not in control of that, and I did the best I could. I mean, there's a lot of coping going on there.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it kind of ties into hindsight's always 2020. Like, you look back and, oh, well, damn it. Like, if I would have known, like, that's the thing. If we would have known, we would have done it, or we wouldn't have done it.
We might have. So the thing is that the thing I find interesting about hindsight is, like, oh, if I had only known, even if you had known that, you might have made the exact same decision.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
And we have this idea in our heads, like, oh, if I had only done this, or if I had only known this, well, maybe.
Yeah.
But maybe the outcome would have been exactly the same.
Well, and that ties into another piece that I feel like is one of my core beliefs that helps me get through life in a way where I feel like I don't have many regrets, which is the idea of, like, the universe is going to get what it wants. Like, it's always like working out. I mean, I will say I've led, like, not necessarily like a charmed life, but like, for as dark as things have gotten, I've seen why they have, like,
you made meaning out of it.
Yeah. So I do have this like very deep core belief of, like, things work out. So even at, like, going back to what you were saying, like, yeah, maybe I would have made the same choice, or like, even if I would have made a different choice, we could still be here. Like, there's a chance that it would still be at this point. Like, I don't, like, we're all going to get to where we're supposed to go. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, and it also leads me back to a conversation that we had earlier, is that when you are trying to make tough decisions, very often there isn't a clear right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's just decisions that lead you down different paths. And so if you can think about it in a less black and white way, so it's more of like, well, this led me down this path, that doesn't mean it's the wrong path, right? Or the right path, it's just a path. And I make adjustments along the way, then not seeing things quite so black or white. I mean, maybe that's part of what it is, right? Is I'm not a super black and white thinker. I know you're not either. And that doesn't mean that I'm naturally some sort of flexible thinker. I've done a lot of work around that. So you can, I think society and the way we grow up, and like, if you think about kids, you have to teach them things in black and white ways, right? They can't think in the gray. But what happens is then you grow up into adults who think in black and white ways because that's how you were taught. So some of the work of therapy and some of the work of self-reflection, meditation, whatever you do, is kind of trying to undo some of those child lessons that you just really struggle as a parent to not teach in these black and white ways. And so if there can be some work done around not thinking in so black and white, and then maybe you don't feel quite so much regret because you don't see things as right or wrong, good or bad. You see them as more like a path that I went down.
Yeah. And I mean, black and white thinking, like, the thing about that is, though, like, it's so easy. Like, we use it with kids because it doesn't take much brain power. And unless...
Well, and they don't have, especially at young ages, the ability to think in any other way, right?
Yeah.
Like, nuance is not a thing to a child.
So I think, like, so then it's easy, so then it's comfortable. And unless something directly challenges that system of thinking, like, I don't know, grad school? Or like something like that, like being placed in a situation where you really have to get messy with things, then you're not going to really develop much of like a gray view of the world or whatever.
I mean, yes, because black and white thinking is inherently easier, right? We can make snap judgments, but there's also inherently more distress in it.
Yeah.
Because
100%.
You know what I mean? So in that sense, it's easier. It's more of a cognitive shortcut for sure. But I think a lot of the reasons people seek therapy, not always, but is because they see things in these more black and white ways. And so one of the challenges kind of challenging some of that thinking a little bit and trying to loosen it up and free it up and kind of bring people in off those edges a little bit.
Yeah. I had something I was going to say, but I forgot. One thing is it makes me think of something that I saw the other day where it was just posed as very much a true or false, like true or false. Depression, anxiety, and stress is developed because of like, I'm butchering it, but essentially like not being true to you. And I was just like, it's so much more than a true or false idea. Like, yes and no and I think I replied with something where I mentioned, well, we're also talking about epigenetics and gene expression at this point. So, and environmental triggers, like,
yeah.
But people like it's so easy to want the black and white.
Well, there's comfort in it, right? Yeah. Because when you live in gray, you live with a lot of ambiguity, which is tough to tolerate.
Yeah.
I mean, grad school mantra, manage your ambiguity, right?
Yeah.
But that is an ongoing thing and not always comfortable.
Yeah.
And really kind of hard to do.
Hey guys, popping in for a quick question. Do you know your signature leadership style? It's kind of really important to know so you can figure out how you do the thing the best way you can. So, if you haven't already, head on over to DesireeW.com, click on Signature Leadership Style Quiz. It is the blue button, and find out. The quiz will tell you if you are a make-it-work mogul, a benevolent boss, a social savant, the ultimate head boss in charge, or if you are a true classic, well-informed and wise. Head on over to DesireeW.com, click Find Your Signature Leadership Style, and let me know what you get. And now we'll get back to the episode. Well, and it's very unsexy, right? Like, folks that... And what's really interesting about this as we're talking about it is we're talking about living in this, like, world of gray without regrets. And, like, I think of people that live in a black and white world and in some ways also don't have regrets, but then it's like also harder emotionally. I don't know, like it was just like these dichotomies are so interesting. Like if you're living in a black and white world, you're going to choose to do something.
Yeah.
And then like I don't know, like because it sounds like the skills that we're talking about using to not have regrets are skills that may not show up in someone that just is in that black and white zone of thinking.
Well, yeah.
And making those choices. And then, but they're also like the type of people where they, like, in my mind, I'm like, they'd be like, well, yeah, of course, like, I have no fucking regrets. I decide to do something and then I do it and that's it.
Yeah, they just go for it 100%. And that's their thing. So sure. I don't think there's only one kind of person. And I hope people who are listening like don't hear us saying like there aren't choices that we're sad about or choices that cross our mind where we're like, oh yeah, that was kind of a bummer. But I think of regret as like deep seated like distress about what could have happened, what should have happened, what ought to have happened, what might have happened. Almost like, you know, as I think about this now, it's almost like those choices and those what could have beens really act as a form of trauma for people because some cognitive work that you do around trauma is kind of tackling those ideas of like, oh, if I had just done this, that terrible, horrific outcome wouldn't have happened to me, my friends, my family. So it's kind of some of that more kind of hindsight thinking.
Yeah.
And so there are particular interventions and therapies that kind of get at some of that, but they're all related to the treatment of trauma.
So I know that when we were kind of talking about this before we started recording, the research kind of shows it as being broken down into kind of 3 facets.
Oh, yeah. I was reading a really interesting article. Let me pull it up so I don't get it wrong. It talked about like why we feel regret. And the hypothesis was that we feel regret in some areas more strongly than others. And so what they talk about is something called self-discrepancy theory, which is discrepancy between who we are and our actual self versus, they break it down into 3 pieces. So there's the actual self, which is kind of your self-concept, like who you think of yourself to be, the traits and qualities that you believe that you possess and have. And then there's the ideal self, which is kind of exactly what it sounds like. Your ideal self, who you ideally would like to be. And then there's something called the ought self, OUGHT. And that's kind of this representation of qualities you believe you should possess based on kind of societal expectations and responsibilities. So it's broken down into these 3 pieces. You may connect with that or you may not. But it was talking about how when there's a discrepancy between any of those relationships in that triangle, that you experience a number of negative emotions. And so a lot of times you can feel disappointment, you can feel regret, you can feel sadness, you can feel self-critical from the belief that you aren't living up to your ideal self or you aren't living up to your ought self. And what these researchers hypothesized is that when you don't live up to your ought self, which is rooted in societal expectation, very often you have to take steps to remediate that, and you have to take steps to do damage control. And so you kind of actively cope with it and do some more active things to try and fix it. Whereas when you don't live up to your ideal self, that gets kind of backburnered because it's just between you and you. So there's this feeling that it doesn't have the kind of pressure, that societal pressure, family pressure, others' expectational pressure. And so you backburner it and don't deal with it. And so that sticks around more heavily for longer periods of time and causes more distress.
So pretty much, I mean, it boils down to social pressure, right? Like if you're worried, and this is why peer pressure is so strong, like if you're really worried about what others think of you, you're likely to have a bigger reaction. Like if I'm understanding right, you're likely to have a bigger reaction and more negative feelings than if like there's like coherency between like your ideal self and the ought self. Like if they mesh, like if you feel like you're meeting societal expectations, you're doing better than if you're not, than if you don't meet those, right?
Yeah. So I think I'm understanding you. We keep saying that to each other. If I'm understanding you correctly. So it's really all about, not everyone lives the same.
Yeah.
I think the ideal self can be more to the forefront for some people. That kind of idealistic quality can be more in the forefront for some folks. And I think and other people can kind of define themselves more by like what their obligations and responsibilities are. And I think kind of knowing yourself and who you are in that way can kind of help you to understand which types of regrets you should, or which types of that discrepancy between, like, if you're a really idealistic person, then trying to tackle the distress that you feel between that mismatch between your actual self and your ideal self is going to be more important. Whereas if you define yourself more by like roles and responsibilities, then your mismatch between your actual self and your ought self is going to be more important for you to tackle. But that we as humans naturally tackle that first because of our need to belong and because of the societal consequences of not tackling it first. Whereas tackling a discrepancy between actual and ideal self is more of an internal process.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like that, I feel like that explains so much of like depression in high school students and Like,
doesn't it? I know.
Like marginalized communities
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. Like it's just not living up to the majority's expectations can really do a lot of damage.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That lack of social belonging,
Mm-hmm.
right? Think about that.
Well, and I wonder if that, like, I will say I've started to recently look into like mental health among like business people and entrepreneurs and stuff.
Hmm.
And I wonder if that's kind of one piece that may like contribute to negative findings that are coming about in terms of like more anxiety, increased depression rates, things like that
Among
being among
entrepreneurs.
entrepreneurs because you are veering off the path of like a 9 to 5 and you're walking like even if you hate your 9 to 5, chances are there's a bit of community there and you're
Yeah.
losing that and you're walking away from a lot of not necessarily societal expectations. Like yes, you're going against societal expectations, you're also losing social support.
But also think about, like, let's say you are an entrepreneur and maybe your business isn't taking off as you want,
Mm-hmm.
and then how that impacts how you feel that you're fulfilling your roles and
Oh yeah, that's
responsibilities.
gonna really fuck with your ideal self.
Yeah, right?
Like, and I feel like for entrepreneurs, the mismatch between the was it true self,
Actual self.
actual self, and ideal self, like that maybe where you see more people kind of fall is because not fall but like struggle um because there is so much internalized pressure to succeed.
Yeah, like you're not living up to your own expectations of
Mhm.
yourself. But then also, if you think about the ought self, let's say you have a family and you have a lot
Mhm.
of responsibilities and you feel maybe financially you're not able to meet those
Yeah.
responsibilities, then that in turn affects your ought self.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like bi-directional stuff
Mhm.
going on in that triangle,
Yeah.
right? Which, yeah, and you're also isolated, right? Because as an
Mhm.
entrepreneur, very often it's just you or like you and one other person.
Yeah.
And then, so you do lose some, you can lose some sense of
Mhm.
community and isolation. And then also, if you think about like this third thing,
Mhm.
is how much self care do entrepreneurs really engage in? Are
Yeah.
they like if they really are feeling a lot of pressure financially or otherwise, maybe they aren't eating right, maybe they aren't getting enough sleep, maybe they're pushing themselves too hard, like maybe they're in launch mode all the time.
Yeah.
And so you have that kind of third thing that's
Mhm.
also weighing them down and impacting their mental health. So I think there can be a lot of things, but in terms of regrets, I think you're right. Like if you think of that
Yeah.
triangle, that
Well,
there's all kinds of things going on there.
because I know like the closest thing like to regrets besides like the couple things that I've mentioned already, like I've had more experiences coming close to having a regret. Like I feel like I've managed a lot of things that could be regrets.
Hmm.
And I've had more of those types of experiences since I started like my entrepreneurial path,
Yeah.
where
It's really challenging, isn't
it's
it?
very much like, well, that choice was wrong, and if I had done X, Y, and Z, then it or like I shouldn't have done like it is so much. It's
Yeah.
so easy to fall into because you see like you very much see in theory direct not consequences but outcomes,
Yeah. It's
you
pretty easy to
know?
measure, isn't it?
Mhm.
But then I know you and I have had a lot of conversations around like, was it a wrong decision? Did you not learn anything from it?
Exactly.
And you're like, no, actually, I did learn something from it. I'm like, okay, so maybe that's the takeaway. So trying to reframe that not as success or failure, not as right or wrong, but like, what
Mhm.
did I learn from it? And then when we talk about that idea of going down a path, okay, I went down that path. I'm not liking what's going on. So how can I adjust rather
Exactly.
than, well, that was a wrong decision?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if people are finding themselves stuck in a sort of regret spiral or cycle or whatever, what are just a couple like takeaways to kind of
That's a great time for
shift
therapy.
shift from that
You're welcome.
or a life coach?
Or a life coach. Absolutely. I mean, that's a great time to seek support,
Yeah.
get an alternative perspective,
Mhm.
right?
I feel like with regrets so much of it is when you're in it, it's really hard to see any other perspective.
Oh,
So
so hard. So hard.
finding some sort of external voice
Yeah.
is really essential. Like I think of one thing that happened between you and I, where like I saw things that were happening with you and everything, and I was like, here's the deal. I don't want to say X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z. Like, this needs to happen.
Yeah.
Like, no one else is going to say it. I'm going to be the awful person and say it.
Yeah, like I hope that people have those people in their lives.
Yeah.
And if they don't, hopefully you can find a therapist or a life coach or some professional to help you kind of weigh in to make those more tougher decisions. Yeah. Not saying that a therapist might necessarily take that road that you did.
Yeah.
But we've also known each other a long time.
Yeah.
And so the role's a little bit different, but to help you problem solve and kind of know.
Well, and a good therapist will say that without saying it.
In a gentler, more supportive way.
They're gonna gently smack you in the face with that same type of stuff, but without actually doing it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I feel like it's true. Like, I feel like a skilled therapist can really bring you to face truths. Like, they can guide you to some really, really interesting things and like essential realizations, really.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, without doing it. And I mean, like, that's why therapy is an art, and that's why therapists have like thousands of hours of training and stuff. So
I mean, you have to learn how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, okay, so kind of trying to find that other perspective, that other voice to say, hang on a minute, have you thought about this? You could also say, even if you don't have that voice, like, is there another way that I could see this?
Yeah.
Seeing it less as black and white, but more as like, okay, what did I learn?
Yeah.
Maybe taking the time to see, what do I need right now? Is there a need that I have that isn't being fulfilled? Right? Like, maybe your self-care is just out the window and that's kind of a more immediate need. And then you'd be surprised how some good self-care can kind of tamp down those negative emotions, reduce the intensity of things, and make it a little bit more manageable. Like, it's not a miracle pill or anything like that. And I think, you know, we've all like gone to bed and then woken up after a good night's sleep and kind of seen things in another light.
Yeah.
So that's the idea of self-care is a really good night, refreshing sleep that allows you to have this other point of view.
Yeah. And I think also, like, challenging yourself on it a bit in terms of what does it benefit me to stay where I am? What good is it going to do? And so, yeah, like, what does it benefit me? What good is it going to do? And also, where do I go from here? Like, wherever you're standing or sitting, like, wherever you are in the situation, you can't go back and undo it. Like, you're where you are. Where do we go from here?
Right. How do we move forward?
So maybe you're feeling like you lost some control. Maybe you're feeling like things kind of like that. How do you take back that control?
How do you feel empowered?
Yeah. How do you empower yourself with where you are?
And don't be surprised if it looks different than you thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. I think that's all we have for this week.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye, friends.
All right, that wraps up another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and if you want to keep up with all of my fun day-to-day shenanigans, then go ahead and follow me across all the social media. I am at DezWMsMBA, so DezWMsMBA. I'm talking Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm everywhere. My Insta stories are so good. Also, if you like what we're doing, if you're kind of mediocre about what we're doing, any of that stuff, please leave a review, share it with someone. If you don't like us, but maybe you know someone that may like us, share it with them. Leave a review, comment, all that fun stuff on iTunes. And also, I would like to thank Forget the Whale for use of their song Move Along as our theme music. And if you haven't already, then go to DesireeW.com, find your legendary leadership style, and let me know what it is, because I'm dying to know. And remember to stay unavailable for fuckery.